Hello everyone and welcome back to part 3 of the Atari PC build. As you can see here, there has been some massive progress made. Now I did all of this off camera because I couldn't find a very good way to film it. It was a pretty tedious process back and forth. There wasn't a lot to show, but I'll go over how I did it so we can cover it in a bit more detail and go more quickly than the few hours it took me to adjust everything here. So as you can see here, the motherboard comes straight out. Set that aside for a moment. And I've made some cuts all the way around in here. And then also for the I/O panels on the top. I did some testing to see if I could desolder those ports off the back, and I'm not sure exactly what I was doing wrong, but I couldn't seem to melt the solder down. I don't know if the circuit boards are using higher temperature solder than what I'm used to, but I had no problem desoldering some of the Atari parts, but I wasn't able to do any of the modern motherboard stuff. So I just decided to leave everything in there and make the cutouts here and here for the components that didn't fit. Now I did all of this using one of these. These are flush cutters. They're often used for cutting trim for doors and molding trim like that, but they work really well for cutting through plastic, and you can get right in flush on the surface. So if there's little tiny features, like right here there was a little pad sticking out in my way, I can come right along the surface and quickly zip that off. So this is a great tool to have, and I recommend it if you're doing any kind of case modding like that. The other thing that I recently picked up were these little tiny files. I actually bought these for a different project, but they came in really handy for cleaning up some of the sharp edges. This plastic has a pretty low melting temperature that the zip saw easily overcame, so there's quite a lot of melted plastic around the edges here, and the file just helped clean up that a lot. And then the other tool that I used quite a bit of is this X-Acto knife. This is sort of a heavy-duty version of a typical X-Acto knife, and it is really good at cleaning up some of the embedded burrs on the ends here, and I could do minor cuts. This plastic is pretty thick. I can't just push down and cut right through it, but for some of the little edges and sharp points, this did a really nice job cleaning up those. As far as knowing where to cut, I have just a cheap pair of calipers here. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I appreciate a good set of calipers. These are not a good set of calipers, but they were inexpensive. They're good enough for home use, but when I'm actually at work, I have a much nicer set of Mitutoyo calipers, and they are far, far superior. But this gets the job done. I'm not dealing with any supercritical tolerances here, so I can afford the inaccuracy that this has. So with the calipers, I just made a few marks, and I kept mocking up where the board was going to go. I made some marks, take a cut, test fit, make a few more marks, cut. So I tried to minimize the amount of cutting that I'd have to do, and I think I did a pretty good job with that. It's not perfect, but there's going to be a whole rear plate across here that I'll cover in part 4 anyway, so this didn't have to be absolutely flawless, but I didn't want it to just be completely missing or have gaping holes, so I tried to make it as neat as I could. One interesting thing is I had to cut a slot all the way across the bottom here, and there's still a couple of these little header pins like right here that are in the way, so I'll probably need to do a little bit more cutting so I can access those pins. I think those are for some of the power buttons or something like that for the case, so I'll need to get back to that. But for now, I am very happy with how this cut turned out. It fits down very nicely inside there. I'm holding it in place here with my fingers. It isn't anchored down to anything, so it slides around a bit, but it does fit in there quite nicely. Now, even with the fan off here, as I said back in part 1, I believe, this is too tall, so you can see here it doesn't quite fit flush, although it's darn close. That's pretty interesting. So I'm going to need to keep working on the cooler, but you can kind of see where this is going. You can see inside there. And this cooler also gets in the way of the cartridge slot. So since I do want to reuse that cartridge slot, I'm going to need to figure something out with that. So in part 4, I'm going to show the design process of how I made that in Fusion 360 and what it took to 3D print that. But I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, so consider this sort of part 4.5, if you will. And I'm going to show off some of the test parts for the bracket. So this is not the entire bracket, but getting these dimensions I found in 3D printing. 3D printing, there's inherent inaccuracies in the 3D printing process. And you can't always trust that your measurements in CAD will be directly made in a 3D printed part. So it helps, before you go waste tons of time and filament printing off the entire part just to have it not fit immediately, helps to print these little smaller pieces here. So these are just small slices of the bracket in various states, so I could do test fits on the important features. The first one is making sure that this plate fits in the slot. So I only printed the slot portion. You can see that that snaps in there just like that. So that looks pretty nice. I was very happy with the fit on that. And then this is the corner pieces. So I started with this one, and what I was trying to do here is make a piece that fills in like this. Turn the camera a bit better. So this will have a little bump out. This won't actually be gray plastic. The final version will be black plastic. I was just using it on some junk PLA for these test parts here, but the final version will use something that matches the case, and will actually be plastic welded in place. So as you can see, there's some gaps there. Things don't quite line up right. So I took that, changed the dimensions a little bit, and got this version. This is actually the other side over here. So that fits in there like that, and you can kind of see it's getting closer, but still not quite the right fit. And then lastly, this one I'm very happy with. It fits in there very nicely. Let's see if I can spin that around. It's kind of hard to hold the motherboard in here. There we go. Like that. So this has the cutout here for the plate. And then you can just picture this extending all the way across the back here with the cutout. Then it'll just be a flush face here, and then the bracket will have this feature over on the other side. I'll weld that in, and then it will just look like a small bump out on the back of the case here. And it will appear to be all one piece, because it is. And that should actually still let me pull this out as well. So if I need to remove the motherboard at some point, I will be able to do that. Well, that brings me to the end of part 3. It's a pretty short video. I am condensing a lot of effort that I spent yesterday trimming all of this, but like I said, there's not much I can really show and still be interesting on camera for that, so I think it was better that I just walk through how I did it in the end once it was finished and could talk over it that way. The next part, as I mentioned, is going over how I 3D model and 3D print things, so that one will be mostly focused on the PC over there, and we'll be going through screen by screen on what I do for taking measurements, how I work in Fusion 360, and then how I bring my 3D models in Fusion 360 to life on my 3D printer. So stay tuned for that video coming up next, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Next part that I was testing out is